There are campers so small that you have to step out of them just to change your mind, but the ones you will see today are from another planet. While today, vintage is a trend, although these 8 models defied all logic of engineering and good taste. They were not just vehicles, they were experimental dreams on wheels that few dared to drive. Make sure to reach spot number 1 because that design is so strange that it looks like a house fleeing from its foundations. Let's go there. Number 8. Ultra Van USA 60s. Imagine you are driving down the highway in the 60s, you look through the rearview mirror and you see something that has no explanation. An elongated, rounded, shiny shape that looks like an airplane fuselage without wings gliding through traffic. It is not a dream, nor a hallucination, it is the Ultra Van. Designed by an aeronautical engineer named David Peterson, this motorhome broke with everything established in the motorhome industry. While other manufacturers mounted wooden boxes on truck chassis, the Ultra Van used an aluminum monocoque structure exactly like the airplanes of the era. There was no traditional frame, there were no separate rails, everything was one piece, light, resistant, and absurdly futuristic. At 22 feet long, about 7 meters, it weighed barely 1,100 kilograms. That is less than many current sedans. Inside, it had a full kitchen, bathroom with shower, bed for 2, and storage space. It was a habitable space capsule, a design dream come true. The problem was in the back. To keep the floor flat and low, Peterson mounted a rear engine from the Chevrolet Corvair, a 6-cylinder air-cooled engine that barely exceeded 100 horsepower. On flat terrain, on straight roads, the Ultra Van worked acceptably. But as soon as a slope appeared, as soon as the road began to climb toward the mountains, things changed. The engine began to lose speed gradually, as if it were fighting against the very air that made it special. Drivers learned to plan any ascent hours in advance, to gain momentum, to pray that the slope was not too long. When Chevrolet stopped manufacturing the Corvair engine, the project was left mortally wounded. They tried to adapt other mechanics, heavier, more powerful, but the original balance was no longer the same. Production slowly faded away and the Ultra Van ended up disappearing. Today it is a cult piece, strange, elegant, and ahead of its time. An airplane that never took off, but that continues to make anyone who looks at it dream. Number 7. Vixen 21 TD, USA 80s. If the 80s were the decade of excess, someone forgot to tell the Vixen 21 TD. In an era where motorhomes were huge, square, and thirsty for fuel, this appeared. Low, stylized, with an almost aggressive stance, like a sports car, elongated to the point of absurdity. It did not look like a motorhome. It looked like a design experiment from another planet. Behind this madness was Bill Collins, one of the engineers involved in the design of the DeLorean, the car from Back to the Future. His vision was simple but radical: to create a motorhome that handled like a European sedan, and boy did he achieve it. The Vixen had a fiberglass body optimized in a wind tunnel, a very low center of gravity thanks to its rear engine, and a design so compact that it fit in a standard suburban garage, something unthinkable for any other vehicle of its class. But the most unexpected thing, what left everyone with their mouths open, was in its mechanical heart. A BMW turbo diesel engine, 6 cylinders, coupled to a 5-speed manual transmission. Yes, you read that right, manual. Changing gears in a 6-meter-long motorhome was not exactly what the average buyer of the 80s expected. But thanks to that combination and its obsessive aerodynamics, the Vixen could reach consumption figures close to 30 miles per gallon. In a decade of cheap gasoline and thirsty V8 engines, that was almost revolutionary. The problem was that the market was not ready. Motorhome buyers wanted automatic comfort. They wanted wide lounges where they could move around. They wanted to feel like they were in a house, not in the cabin of an airplane. The low roof of the Vixen forced a section to be raised using a hydraulic system to be able to stand up, something that many considered an unnecessary hassle. The result was brutal. The company went bankrupt after manufacturing fewer than 600 units. Too advanced, too different, too misunderstood for its time. Today, the few Vixens that survive are coveted by collectors who appreciate their rarity and their history. Because the Vixen 21 TD taught us something important. Sometimes the future arrives ahead of time and nobody knows what to do with it. Number 6. Clark Cortez, USA 60s. There are companies that dedicate themselves to manufacturing forklifts, and then there are companies that, one fine day, decide that they can also manufacture motorhomes, just like that. Clark, a company known precisely for its industrial forklifts, decided to enter the world of motorhomes in the 60s, and it did not do so subtly. It did it as if it were building one of its cargo vehicles, with steel, a lot of steel. The Clark Cortez was literally a tank with windows. Instead of mounting a wooden box on a conventional chassis as everyone else did, Clark engineers opted for something radical, a completely steel unibody structure. No improvised bolted parts, no wood that swells with humidity, everything integrated, welded, solid, industrial, and the most surprising thing, front-wheel drive. Decades before that became common in recreational vehicles. By eliminating the rear drive shaft, they achieved a completely flat floor. You could walk inside the Cortez with total comfort, without raised tunnels or uncomfortable steps, something that in the 60s was science fiction. It was brilliant in concept, but that strength hid an obvious problem. The steel made it incredibly robust, but also absurdly heavy. At nearly 3,200 kilos, the original engine, a Plymouth V8 of 318 cubic inches, could barely move it with dignity. Reaching highway speeds required patience, a lot of patience, and a generous right foot. Accelerations were slow, overtakes, a strategic planning, and then there was the silent enemy, rust. In regions where salt was used on the roads during the winter, the metal began to deteriorate from below. What seemed indestructible could turn into orange dust over the years, devouring chassis and bodywork without mercy. The Clark Cortez was a work ahead of its time, a statement of principles on how things should be built to last forever. But weight and corrosion were its Achilles' heels. Today, the few restored examples are collector's pieces for those who appreciate its almost stubborn industrial engineering. Because the Cortez did not apologize for being heavy, it demanded respect for being solid. Number 5. Toyota Sunraider 4x4, Japan, USA 80s. Long before luxury campers dominated Instagram, before the Sprinter 4x4 became the dream of every adventurer, there existed a small, almost indestructible warrior. The Toyota Sunraider 4x4 was not the largest, nor the most luxurious, nor the most eye-catching, but it was possibly one of the most capable off-road vehicles ever built. The base was the legendary chassis of the Toyota Hilux, that same one that Top Gear tried to kill without success years later. On that indestructible platform, the manufacturers mounted a fiberglass body molded in two main pieces. No wooden panels that swell with the rain, no eternal leaks that turn the interior into a breeding ground for dampness. It was compact, resistant, and surprisingly agile on roads where other recreational vehicles were left stranded without remedy. It could climb rocky trails, cross streams, ford complicated terrain, and reach places that seemed impossible for a motorhome. It seemed the perfect balance between adventure and autonomy, the dream of any traveler who wanted to get away from the asphalt without giving up basic comforts, until the problem began to appear. The early models of the Sunraider carried too much weight on a rear axle that was not designed for such demand. They used a configuration known as full floating, which looked like dual wheels but did not offer the real resistance of a 1-ton axle. Under full load, with water, belongings, food, and passengers, the stress was extreme. Disturbing stories began to circulate, axles that gave way in the middle of the highway, risky situations that nobody wanted to experience at high speed. Toyota, which has always been serious about its responsibilities, ended up launching massive recalls to replace those components with reinforced versions. It was a hard blow to the model's reputation, but the Japanese brand did the right thing. It recognized the error and solved it. After the correction, the Sunraider regained its reputation and today is considered a legend of classic overlanding, a vehicle that demonstrates that even giants can have feet of clay, but also that honesty and timely solutions build legends. Ironically, what almost ruined its history ended up turning it into one of the most sought-after campers by collectors around the world. So far, we have seen fascinating rarities, machines that were ahead of their time or that prioritized innovation over common sense. But the four that follow are on another level. They are the ones that took the idea of motorhome to territories where physics, gravity, and balance ceased to be a priority. And the number one is not just strange, it is probably the most absurd and brilliantly dangerous camper that has ever rolled. Get ready because the vertigo is about to begin. Number 4. Chevrolet Blazer Chalet USA 70s. The idea on paper was brilliant, to take a robust and popular 4x4 vehicle like the Chevrolet K5 Blazer and turn it into an integral camper from the factory itself. No home adaptations, no improvised carpentry in the garage at home, a clean professional solution ready to use. Thus was born the Blazer Chalet, one of Chevrolet's boldest bets in the 70s. The integration was total. The front cabin and the rear living area were connected, allowing the driver to pass from the steering wheel to the kitchen without having to get out of the vehicle, a blessing on rainy or extremely cold days. Inside there was space to cook, to eat, to sleep 4 people. Stove, sink, portable fridge, all inside a Blazer with 4-wheel drive. On paper, it was the adventurer's dream, the ultimate tool for those who wanted to reach remote places without giving up basic comforts. But then physics remembered it had something to say. The problem began with that raised fiberglass roof. To create living space in the back, the designers had to raise the roofline significantly. That roof, along with the structure that supported it, added nearly 450 kilos to the highest part of the vehicle. Suddenly, the center of gravity of the Blazer, which was not exactly low to begin with, transformed into public enemy number 1. On paved roads, the Chalet behaved in an acceptable manner, with that swaying characteristic of tall vehicles but within what was expected. The problem appeared when the asphalt ended. On rocky paths, on steep slopes, on irregular terrain, the vehicle began to feel strange. Drivers noticed a lateral tilt even when they were traveling in a straight line. The weight added in the heights made the Blazer move like a pendulum, slowly recovering from every bump, from every dip. The rear suspension, designed for a much lighter vehicle, suffered under the constant load. The transmission worked at the limit on climbs, and what should have been an unstoppable off-roader, an explorer of impossible paths, ended up feeling like something constantly on the edge of imbalance, like a tightrope walker who never finishes finding the correct posture. Chevrolet manufactured around 1,780 units before the project silently disappeared, without big announcements, without farewell campaigns. They simply stopped doing it. Today, precisely because of that rarity, because of that combination of utility and rarity, the Blazer Chalet can reach prices higher than $50,000 in specialized auctions. A respectable figure for a vehicle that, at the time, nobody knew very well how to classify. Number 3. Volkswagen Beetle Superbugger, USA 70s. There was a moment in history where creativity and a lack of regulations shook hands to produce things that today seem directly absurd to us. The Superbugger is the perfect example. Someone, somewhere in California, looked at a small Volkswagen Beetle, the emblematic bug, and thought, a house fits in there. No, not a tent on the roof, not a trailer behind, a house, literally. The idea was simple in its conception but terrifying in its execution. To cut the Beetle just behind the front seats, eliminate the original rear part, and mount on what remained a wooden structure that looked more like extreme DIY than serious engineering. The result was something that could only be described as a mini cabin nailed onto a chassis designed for something much, much more modest. Inside, the Superbugger offered the basics: a tiny sink, a small camp stove, space for 2 people to sleep in a fetal position. On paper, it sounded like the minimalist dream, the quintessence of van life decades before the term existed. On the road, it was a completely different story. The problem was not the idea itself, which had its charm. The problem was physics, that friend who always appears when you least need her. The original Beetle, with its rear air-cooled engine, barely delivered about 60 horsepower. It was enough to move the small car and its occupants with dignity as long as there were no very steep hills. But now, that same engine had to drag a wooden box that weighed several hundred kilos, and what was worse, turned the whole thing into a giant sail every time a side wind blew. Exceeding 80 kilometers per hour felt like forcing destiny, like asking too much of an engine that was never designed for such a task. Curves became exercises in faith, with the swaying threatening to tilt the structure beyond what was reasonable. And braking on steep descents was not a mechanical action, it was an act of faith. Literally, one had to pray that the brakes, the same ones that stopped an 800-kilo car, could handle a setup that doubled GU weight. Even so, in 1975, the Superbugger cost around $6,000, a non-negligible amount for the time, and people bought it because it represented freedom, the possibility of traveling with your house on your back, even if that house was unstable, slow, and potentially dangerous. Today, ironically, a superbugger in good condition can exceed $40,000 in classic vehicle auctions. Time that implacable judge has turned what was a dangerous rarity into a coveted collector's piece. A vehicle that struggles to overtake a bicycle transformed into an object of desire. History has a sense of humor. Number 2. Del Rey 3 level, USA 60s. If you thought a camper had to be compact for obvious reasons, if you believed that there existed a logical limit to what you could build on the bed of a pickup, the Del Rey 3 level arrived to break all those schemes and some more. In the middle of the 60s, in a world where experimentation knew no limits, someone looked at the bed of a standard truck and decided that something more than a simple elevated bed or a tent fit there. He decided to build a 3-level house, and no, it is not a metaphor, it is a literal description. At the very top, above the driver's cabin, a resting area with space for 2 people. On the intermediate level, at the height of the original bed, a room with seats and a small folding table, the dining room. And in the lower part, just above the ground, the kitchen with access to the exterior. It was a split-type design, like a multi-story house compressed into the back of a truck, a Tower of Babel on wheels. Visually, the impact was undeniable. The Del Rey 3 level drew attention wherever it appeared. People stopped to look, to point, to ask. It was a statement of intent, a way of saying, my house is bigger than yours even if it is on wheels. Architecturally, it was ingenious, with each level taking advantage of space in a clever way, but physically it was disturbing. The problem, as always, was weight. Just the structure of the camper, built in wood and fiberglass, was around 1,300 kilograms. That is without counting water, without counting luggage, without counting the passengers on the upper level. When everything was added, the rear suspension of many pickups of the time began to give way dramatically. The nose of the vehicle lightened, losing contact with the road. The front wheels lost load and grip. The steering became imprecise, vague, as if the truck did not know very well where it wanted to go. Now imagine taking a curve at 90 kilometers per hour with a center of gravity so high that it seems to want to tilt by its own decision. Imagine overtaking another vehicle and feeling how the side wind pushes against that 3-story wall. Every gust became a warning, every curve a prayer, every braking an exercise in risk calculation. The Del Rey 3 level was not just big, it was disproportionate for the vehicle that carried it, a solution in search of a problem that nobody had asked to solve. Even so, it became a legendary piece. Today, finding one complete and in good condition is almost impossible, and collectors pay surprising figures just for the module, for that 3-story structure that defied gravity and against all odds, survived to tell the tale. Number 1. GMC Motorhome, USA 70s. When General Motors, the American giant, decided to enter the world of motorhomes in the 70s, it did not do so by copying anyone. It did not take an existing truck chassis and mount a box on it. No, it designed something from scratch. And the result looked like something out of a science fiction movie of the era. The GMC Motorhome did not look like anything that had circulated before. Its profile was low, elegant, with soft lines that seemed sculpted by the wind. It did not have that square and clumsy shape of traditional motorhomes. It looked like a land shuttle, a spaceship ready to travel the American highways. The key to its behavior was underneath, in a platform completely its own that General Motors developed specifically for this vehicle. Front-wheel drive, something unheard of in a vehicle of this size in those years. Independent suspension on all 4 wheels, also an absolute rarity. And a tandem rear wheel system with air suspension, which allowed for adjusting the height and firmness according to the load. The result was a motorhome more than 8 meters long and 4,500 kilos in weight that, incredibly, was handled with a stability that no competitor could match. On the highway, the GMC remained firm, without those swaying characteristics of conventional motorhomes. In curves, it traced with surprising precision. Drivers who tested one for the first time could not believe they were driving something so large. Many experts consider it to this day the best motorhome in terms of driving ever produced. So, what went wrong? Timing, it was all a matter of timing. The GMC motorhome mounted a huge V8 engine of 455 cubic inches, a 7.5-liter displacement that delivered plenty of power but consumed fuel as if there were no tomorrow. In an era of cheap gasoline, that was not a problem. The problem was that just when the model was beginning to consolidate, when sales were starting to take off, the oil crisis of 1973 arrived. Suddenly, there were endless lines at the gas stations. Fuel prices skyrocketed. Energy panic took over the country, and nobody, absolutely nobody, wanted a vehicle that barely achieved between 8 and 10 miles per gallon, about 3 or 4 kilometers per liter. It was not an engineering failure. It was not a design error. It was an external blow, a perfect storm that no manufacturer could foresee. The GMC motorhome was too good for the worst possible moment. Production continued until 1978, leaving nearly 13,000 units manufactured, but the damage was already done. The reputation of drinker stuck to the model like a limpet. Today, however, the GMC motorhome is an absolute icon. Restored and modernized with more efficient engines and updated systems, many examples exceed $100,000 in the collector market. It is the definitive proof that brilliant design, bold engineering can survive the worst of contexts. That good ideas, even if they arrive at the wrong time, end up finding their place in history. And for that, for its audacity, for its genius, for its tragic bad luck, the GMC motorhome is, without discussion, the king of the absurd on this list. From an airplane fuselage with a Corvair engine that could not climb hills, passing through an elongated sports car with a manual transmission that nobody knew how to appreciate, to reaching a 3-story tower on a pickup that defied gravity in every curve. All these vehicles have something in common. Someone dared to think differently. They were rolling experiments, crazy ideas that someone took off the drawing board and put on wheels, even if everyone thought they were crazy. Some failed miserably due to weight or center of gravity problems. Others changed the industry without anyone noticing at the time, and several today would be impossible to homologate for safety reasons that did not even exist when they were built. But the history of motorhomes does not advance only with sensible and boring designs. It advances with engineers who dared to ask, what if we put a second floor on it? With dreamers who looked at a Beetle and saw a house. With brilliant lunatics who signed plans that anyone else would have torn up. With companies that risked everything for an idea, even if the moment did not accompany them.